Online audience. My name's Tom Mitchell. I am the director of the International Institute for Environment and Development, and I will be your moderator today. And I'm delighted to welcome you to this panel with a set of esteemed panelists on enabling the green seas of new trade opportunities for least developed countries, learning from COVID-19 response to address the climate emergency. And also I'd like to thank the organizers of this session, so the Overseas Development Institute and the Enhanced Integrated Framework. Thank you very much to the organizers. And we will spend an hour today with colleagues here discussing the opportunity that trade in green goods, products and services offers, the opportunity it offers for least developed countries. We will be shortly joined by the Minister from the Gambia as well. Unfortunately, she is just held up a little bit. Will be joining us shortly. But I suggest that we move on with the discussion. And with that, I would like to welcome Mr. Jean-Marie Pogam, Deputy Director General of WTO, to give us some opening remarks. Thank you.
Minister Villetavio, Undersecretary General Rahab Fatima, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, very pleased to join you today as we bring this critical conversation to the Trade House Pavilion of this COP28. Today's conversation is about the lessons that we can learn from the COVID-19 pandemic and the way LDCs have been confronting it and recovered from it. Is there any lesson that we could learn to use in the fight against climate change? It is true that both crises have a lot in common. In both cases, LDCs were and are hit the hardest by the COVID-19 pandemic and the climate change crisis. The climate crisis ruins agricultures, increases food insecurity, and destroys trade infrastructures. And on the trade front also, LDCs were hit harder by the COVID-19 pandemic and have experienced the slowest recovery since then. In fact, trade has acted as an amplifier, while LDCs connected to global supply chains saw the most significant drop in their merchandise exports during the pandemic. They also recovered faster. So what does this tell us about the climate crisis? We could start with an example, for instance, Vanuatu. In 2015, due to climate change, Vanuatu suffered enormous devastation from the tropical cyclone Pam, with 90% of its central port villa destroyed. The country has proved resilient to external economic shocks. It partnered with the international community to strengthen its technical assistance program, rebuild the port infrastructure after Cyclone Pam, and build up in its tourist industry. And in 2020, the country even graduated out of the LDC status. So the key point I'm trying to illustrate here is that the fight against the climate change, the climate crisis, can also bring trade opportunities to the LDCs that can be leveraged with the support of the international community. And this is a major difference with COVID-19, because there were no economic opportunities brought by the pandemic, only losses. Today, the deployment of net zero strategies unleashed by the Paris Agreement can generate a reallocation of comparative advantages. Instead of specializing on what you are relatively better at, decarbonation invites you at specializing on what you are relatively greener at, as the WTO chief economist likes to put it. This is where the new trading opportunities could lie for many LDCs. We know that many of them enjoy significant endowment and potential in renewable energies, low-emission agricultural products, alternative to fossil-based products such as plastics. And actually, we met this morning with a global coalition of renewable energy investors, and they were asserting to the DG the huge potential of Africa, for instance, on green hydrogen. So these opportunities are not a dream. The question, of course, is will the LDCs be able to grab these opportunities? Will they be allowed to benefit from the green specialization? And the truth is that there is absolutely no guarantee about it. To the contrary, some current trade trends are quite worrisome in that regard. The first one is called global fragmentation. It is now being documented that trade policies are becoming more and more influenced by national security considerations, industrial policy considerations, sustainability considerations. And all these are very legitimate, but if the resulting trade policies are not minimally coordinated and made compatible, then we may witness a progressive fragmentation of the world trading system. And I'm talking, for instance, of the current proliferation of carbon pricing schemes, border adjustment, decarbonization standards, product regulations. We know that those trends may not only reduce world growth potential, but also reduce chances of achieving the very objective of the Paris Agreement. So in other words, we would lose both on the economic and the climate front. And LDCs would probably be the first to pay a heavy price. The second threat comes from the risk of exclusion from the trade value chains. And this is a threat which is particularly affecting LDCs. While countries legitimately use different policies and instruments to fight climate change, compliance with this policy generates increased costs and barriers to trade for LDCs, which adds more pressure and challenges to what they already face. LDCs face new requirements for technologies and products, including those related to traceability, emission measurements, standards, and compliance procedures. So in a nutshell, your economy may be the greenest of all the greens, but you may not be able to prove it to your customer abroad. And this is a cost. So if those two threats would combine, global fragmentation and exclusion of LDCs, then we would have a worst-case scenario with a world specializing in some, on one hand, green technologies and products, and on the other hand, LDCs being left behind with a brown and old economy. Can we prevent that scenario? Yes. And strengthening the WTO is both a condition and an effective way to confront these threats. First, because the multilateral trading system offers the best anchor for LDCs to pursue their development strategies and attract investors. Acceding to the WTO is rightly seen as a passport for trade and business environment reforms that will help attract foreign investment. And you know that today, for instance, we have Timor-Leste and Comoros, which are making considerable efforts to join the WTO. And I'm proud to report also that our members have been recently adopting a decision to try to mitigate the potentially adverse effects of LDCs graduating out of the status of LDCs on their trade regime. So that's first. Second, the WTO offers the only guarantee against further fragmentation of the global trading system derived from uncoordinated policies. We strongly invite our members to prevent the risk of fragmentation by discussing sustainability and climate trade policies within the WTO. And the good news is that they have been starting to do so. And our forthcoming ministerial meeting in February, not far from here in Abu Dhabi, will be a very important opportunity for them to provide guidance to the future of this discussion. Third, the WTO is a place where transaction costs and compliance costs from diverging standards and policy can be reduced for LDCs and everyone. Fourth, there are many ways to green trade policies and leverage it into the fight against climate change. There is no one-size-fits-all, and LDCs, as each and every country is willing to support them, can pick and choose the best trade policy tools that better suit their needs. Trade facilitation, government procurement, standardizations, tariffs, agricultural reform, trade finance, and many others. And this is why the Secretariat of the WTO is launching here, a trade policy toolkit that each member can consider to optimize its trade and climate nexus. Finally, you know that the WTO Aid for Trade initiative supports developing countries and LDCs in building strong trade institutions and bolstering infrastructure and productive sectors with high export potential. So, ladies and gentlemen, my message is simple: helping LDCs to addressing climate change and benefit from the new opportunities which are associated with the decarbonization of the global economy requires this concerted effort of the international community that can only happen within the multilateral trading system. I hope that today's conversation, Mr. Chair, moderator, can inspire to live up to this challenge. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Director General. Really insightful start to the panel, which I'm extraordinarily excited about. I think we've got some really insightful views coming around the opportunities of green trade for LDCs, where I think we're acknowledging with that there is a dimension of this related to decarbonisation, and there's a dimension of this that is related to resilience building. And also from that perspective, it's LDCs that are often on the front line of that and have had to have found experiences and insights to be able to tackle the impacts of climate change. So keen to look at that dimension too. So the session will focus very much on the role of the multilateral trading system in supporting LDCs, as Deputy Director General has highlighted, particularly to find those new trade opportunities and what's going to be required to do that. And I think here, the naming of the panel and the topic today is about how LDCs can seize the green opportunity rather than be squeezed by the green opportunity. And as you pointed out, there is, there's a possibility that it goes both ways. And of course, we only want to make sure it is an opportunity that can be seized. And so with that, what I'd like to do is just to make sure that both the audience here and online, hopefully as well, I'm not sure whether you have that facility, thinks of questions to also pose to the panel later on in our session. And so it's also a plea for panelists to keep their commentary brief so we can actually get into a discussion later in this session. But without further ado, I'd like to ask Minister Vaila Tavio, Minister for Foreign Trade and Development of Finland. We're delighted to have you, Minister. Excellency, based on your experiences, how can we best address the climate emergency in vulnerable countries, and what tools are needed?
Thank you. Thank you. That's a large question, actually. We notice the trade aspects in all the developing policies right now because Finland is looking the African countries as a mutual partner. And what was the question again? This is how I'd open anyway.
So how can we better address the climate emergency in vulnerable countries? What tools are needed?
Well, yeah, definitely many tools are needed. Well, we can look it on the short term or the long term. I think trade goes maybe a bit of a longer term, but we do have one good example is a new fund by IFAD actually that was opened yesterday here. And it's called ARCAFIM. It's a rural climate fund where farmers are supported. They are given loans and new equipment, so that way they can adapt to climate change. But there can also be like this is a preparedness for the what's coming on and also countermeasure, of course, the whole climate issue. Finland donated 32 million euros, quite a significant amount, and that's a good example of how actually we try to work with the businesses, with the rural areas to prevent the climate crisis effect locally. But I think like the way you asked was quite an open question. So I think this is such a broad subject, and I would definitely like to go to trade views as well. So it's a great topic hosted by World Trade Organization, and I know that we're going to have lots of discussion about this in Abu Dhabi when there is the meeting next. So we'll be here again. But I'm happy to hear what the other panels has to say about the subject as well.
No, let me pass it on as well in other questions. But if you can, but I think what we're acknowledging from your response is that there's obviously a short-term need to address the impacts of climate change in those vulnerable countries. There's a need to support with the adaptation that's needed, for example, of small-scale farmers, and there's a need to think about the longer-term trade opportunities that are being developed in partnership with countries like yours, which actually can support the economic transformation that's required. And I think we're acknowledging that those different time horizons are all active here, and we need to work on them all simultaneously. But I wonder then, we're going to pass to my colleague who has been very much at the heart of these discussions, who is coming to us from the Gambia, which would really on the front line of the opportunities of seizing the green economy. And I wonder, introducing the Minister of the Environment, Climate Change and Natural Resources, Minister Rohi John Manjang. It's our delight to have you with us. And the question I'd love to ask you is, from the perspective of the Gambia, how do you see the kind of connections between climate change and trade, or an environment and trade? And how can you deal with the kind of emerging issues related to green trade?
Thank you. Is the mic? Thank you for having me. I'm happy to sit in for my Minister of Trade, who could not make it to COP28. I hope I will not be biased to put everything into climate perspective, but I think they are related. The first aspect is to see how we're moving into green jobs. Everything is turning into green, and I hope our monies are not also going to turn into greens. Anyway, aside that, the Gambia has already started moving. As a least developed countries, it's a must for us to do. We have no other alternative. There's no choice. Maybe our only stumbling block is finance. But that is why our NDC 2023 to 2027 is green recovery focus. To tell you that we've already decided that every part of our policies, every part of our strategies, every part of our plans should be climate friendly. We've already decided that from 2023 to 2027. So you can even, this can be led to justifying that we already have our young girls already trained in solar installations. They have not gone to university to that extent, but we were able to create a solid training for them, and they're working with the EU to install a 23 megawatt plant. So these are young girls. So we're working towards that part because, as I said, it's a must. Our only challenge is access to finance. And I want to thank the IEF and then the World Trade Organization for giving that avenue. We need to start the discussion to understand that life cannot go the way it was going. Business as usual is not going to happen. We have to change the way we are doing things. And going by our NDC, we have 5 focus areas. Energy. And we know that we cannot go with the old generators. We cannot also even use the previous technology and infrastructure. We cannot efficient in transmitting even energy. So that's why now we're even using the OMV, that's the Organization for Gambia River Basin. We have in 4 African countries who are in this. It is very expensive, but we have money to do it. The infrastructure has been set up. By next November, we should be able to open everything for the 4 countries, not to only access the hydropower from each of these member countries, but even beyond it, because the infrastructure needs to be there. And that is telling you that without the solid infrastructure, the change to green recovery is going to be very difficult. Coming back to trade, everything has to change. We all agree, especially in a low-income earning country. The good part of it is some of it we have to import because we are still not capacitized to go at that level of technology. For example, the air conditioning. We need to change what has been built there. The hydrocarbon in it, we cannot continue using it. It has to be environmentally friendly. And that environmentally friendly means that we need to tap into technology transfer. And also even make sure that we have policies that will guide how this infrastructure can be transferred to the countries. Because if you don't have the technology, you'll not be able to have the policies. If you don't have the policies either, you'll not be able to assess as to what you're going to agree. But the good part of it, the Minister of Trade is now fully informed as per the environment aspect of building in their policies, and they're already having their trade policies, national policies that's going to be environmentally friendly. I want to use this opportunity to say that Gambia is a developing country, but we are more into agriculture. And agriculture has been the key employer of our sector. But we have been failing in agriculture. We are seriously affected and impacted because of climate change. What can we do to change that dynamics? Is to change the way we have been doing agriculture, but it should be environmentally smart. And that is where the Minister of Trade has to come in. The success of it is, I used to tell people that we're thinking that organic foods are expensive or they are difficult, but the market is there. If people are conscious of the successes of all, the advantage of eating organic foods, they will spend money to get it. We are already talking about fisheries. The fisheries department or sector has been seriously affected by the climate change. And we need to change how we do that. And it has to be environmentally smart. The Minister of Trade is the center in everything that we are doing. He is the luckiest man when it comes to our ministries. Because environment, we cannot do all our processes without having trade into it. Agriculture, the same thing, and other sectors as well. What is important is how do we change the skills to match the new take of the world. That is giving them the environment that they need and having the clean. But the transition is very expensive. People are already trained to higher levels, to master's levels. And you ask them to change back to 0-1. But it has to be also very smart, and it also has to be financed, and we also have to take it on a soft base. It's very important that we take it on a soft base. You cannot ask a grown elderly person to change entirely from the old days. It has to be a transition. That transition must follow. And that is why we are having the Catch Them Young policy. We're having a project that we are calling Catch Them Young, teaching young kids, young children at school on environmental friendly attitudes, how to plant trees, how to manage your house environmentally. Because these are the people that we want them to understand that nature has changed, or we have changed against nature, and nature is asking us to change in for it. So therefore, it's important that we catch them as young as they are, so that they can change their way of doing things to adjust and adapt to the realities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. No, really, a round of applause. I think really great to hear the insights from the Gambia about a joined-up strategy, particularly with the green jobs and the Catch Them Young policy. I love that. But also I heard from you, and this was something, Minister, that you'd picked up as well, is that there's a strong financing component here to this. And I suppose let's come back to this on the panel, is a question also of not just how much, but also with what quality, with what repayment levels and so on, because this is a key component now of actually the just transition into green trade. But maybe it's a question that the audience can pick up around the financing needs. But let's just zoom out a little bit here. We've heard some insights about Finland's cooperation and about the situation in the Gambia. And I'd like to turn to you, Mr. Aniket Gai, senior economist in the Office of the High Representative for LDCs, LLDCs and SIDS. I hope everybody's up with their UN acronyms today, who leads the office's work on climate change. You have been working very much across the context of multiple countries and understanding the opportunities here. So I'd really like to get your sense of where we stand. What is the opportunity that is provided for by the climate emergency for LDCs, and equally what needs to change to actually help here?
Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me on this? Thank you. So thank you, Tom, for the pertinent question. And at the outset, I would like to thank the WTO and ODI for the kind invitation to speak at this event. As you mentioned, our office is the Office of the High Representative for the LDCs, the LLDCs, and the SIDS. And among others, we are, if you will, the custodians of their respective programs of action of the three different groups. And these are generally negotiated as 10-year programs of action, and they come in as a complement to the 2030 agenda, as a complement to the WTO agreements, as a complement to the Paris Agreement. So you ask, what needs to change to ensure that the global trading system delivers for the LDCs so that they benefit and they do not suffer from trade and climate policies? So I'd like to highlight three pertinent areas in this regard. First, the Doha Programme of Action for the LDCs, which we recently concluded, does indeed include a dedicated priority area on international trade. And the programs of action, trade features as an important component in this logic of trade as an engine for growth for these countries. And so, among others, the Doha Programme of Action includes some provisions, targets, and actions on areas such as duty-free and quota-free market access, preferential rules of origin, doubling the LDC's share of global exports by 2031. Under the predecessor agreement, the Istanbul Programme of Action, we did not achieve the target for the LDCs as a whole, so we are seeking to do so in the next Programme of Action. It also includes targets on doubling aid for trade by 2031 from 2018 levels. We must turn these words into action. One of the sort of axioms behind the Istanbul Programme of Action, and which is retained also in the Doha Programme of Action, is building structural transformation in LDCs as a means to generating high rates of GNI growth, which can then feed into some of the social SDG indicators and other indicators. But all of this somehow links up to mitigation when we're looking at the interplay with the Paris Agreement. So I'd like to turn to a point on that. And of course, as has been said many a time, LDCs have contributed the least to global greenhouse gas concentrations, and their current per capita emissions remain far below the global average. So this is partly due to the fact that only 56% of the population in LDCs has access to electricity. And this situation must be addressed as a matter of high priority. And so that the sort of green challenge facing the LDCs is how to make this transition in a way that their contributions to GHG emissions remains low, decoupling. And so they need both a reliable and a sustainable source of energy to ensure that the transition is in a sustainable manner to achieve the structural transformation and the objectives that are envisioned in their programs of action. And this will enable them to diversify their economy, to move up global value chains, to derive benefits from trade, and broaden their export base. One point that is sometimes masked in the data, so the 56% figure I gave you earlier on is from one of the SDG data tables, but there's also this question of a reliable source of energy. I would maybe refer to a personal example in my country, Kenya, which is not an LDC, but during the dry season, much of the hydropower causes shortages and cutouts. It's essential to have a reliable source of energy in order to be able to power sustainable industrial development, in order to, and we are looking increasingly, as was said earlier on, LDCs have a huge untapped renewable energy potential. We need to be able to tap that energy potential. And this requires, and if we look at the amounts that are required in order to provide energy access on the scale that we need, it's clear that these amounts can't come from the public sector alone. So we need to find ways of generating the investments that are needed in order to make this kind of transformation. And we have seen that FDI flows to LDCs have been low. They took a big hit following the pandemic and subsequent food, energy, fertilizer price crisis. So I would like to offer 3 suggestions how we might address this mitigation renewable energy challenge. First of all, we need innovative financial instruments to de-risk and mobilize private sector investment and bring new markets to maturity. This is clear because we're not seeing the kinds of FDI flows that we need. And so the second point, I'm going back to the Doha Programme of Action for the LDCs that I referred to earlier on. And it includes 5 deliverables. One of them is an international investment support center for the LDCs. We hope that we are working hard to transform this deliverable into reality. And we see that it could help leverage FDI and green investment, as well as promote the kinds of transfer of renewable energy technology, knowledge, and know-how that are needed to tap into the renewable potential. And then the third is how the WTO itself could help contribute to this, and in promoting trade in environmentally sound technologies and full operationalization of Article 66.2 of the TRIPS agreement and various other means. So, Tom, you mentioned the adaptation issue, and so I would like to sort of have a final point on that. LDCs are not only among the most vulnerable countries to climate change, but their export sector is also highly exposed. Many of them, 4/5 of LDCs are commodity dependent. In some cases, that's mineral and fossil fuel exports, but by and large, it's primary food commodities, agricultural products. So the export sector and the tradable sector in general is highly exposed to the adverse impacts of climate change. So it is urgent for LDCs. So as part of the overall policy of bringing synergies and reaping the green potential from trade, we need to make sure that we implement adaptation policies and build resilience in the export sector, but also in the agricultural sector overall. And unfortunately, despite 10 years of working at NAPS, to date, only 22 of the 46 LDCs have submitted national adaptation plans. So our office has a strong advocacy component to help address the shortfall in funding available for adaptation. And here I will, in conclusion, offer 2 suggestions on how we can move forward on this most critical issue. First of all, we must rapidly scale up concessional adaptation finance and streamline the related project approval processes. We've heard this in numerous other fora, but I would like to underline that. And secondly, we must also accelerate adaptation on the ground. And to support the adaptation process, our office has launched an effort to try to mobilize funds to help the 20 LDCs that are furthest behind in the national adaptation plan process, to make sure that by COP29, all LDCs will have a NAP on the table, and if possible, a bankable project to go with it. So that's something that we are doing. And then really my last sort of point, because is on 2 upcoming big opportunities. A number of LDCs are also landlocked developing countries. So they have multiple challenges. They also have the landlocked challenges. And you mentioned earlier, Tom, in your opening, I think it was actually the Deputy Director General mentioned the impacts of COVID. And the landlocked developing countries that are also LDCs really suffered from accessing something as simple as food imports during the COVID. So we have got this opportunity of the Rwanda in June of 2024 in Kigali, Rwanda, will be held the 3rd UN conference for the landlocked developing countries, which will adopt the new 10-year program of action for the LLDCs. And they have lots of other additional trade-related issues like trade facilitation. And so this is a very big opportunity for us, again, to bring, to further have trade and climate change generate benefits for the landlocked developing countries and the LDCs. And then we also have the SIDS 4 conference, which everybody knows about, and that also offers some additional opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me just ask one brief follow-up question, because I'm curious. You're in a position as a senior economist in an agency supporting the countries that we're talking about, and I'm a LDC trade minister, and there has just been a major discovery of oil and gas in my country, and I have the opportunity to export that and to generate some wealth for the country. What would your advice be from your office?
Well, this is a very interesting point and an important point. And also, there was some mention earlier on, and I believe there's a discussion within the WTO on graduation and graduation support. So one of the deliverables from the Doha Program of Action is something called a graduation support facility, which we are working very closely with graduating LDCs, and I'll mention the connection to your question in a second, is how we can support graduating LDCs to make this smooth transition and not suffer excessively from the removal of international support measures for the LDCs. Now, a number of graduating LDCs have been, achieved significant progress due to the proceeds and revenues flowing from the export of fossil fuels. So this raises a very important question. because there's a double challenge facing these LDCs and also other LDCs that have some component of their economy and their export earnings arising from fossil fuel exports. So on the one hand, you have to face the challenge of the removal of international support measures for graduation, but and on the other hand, you also have to decarbonize your economy, and you're also facing, switching away. So really, I see this is a challenge facing the UN system. We have to find ways, and there are some, and it's also linked to the whole conversation on just transition. So it is a very big challenge facing the LDCs, particularly those graduating LDCs that have got a significant component of their economy from fossil fuels, and we have to find ways. I think, and it's a challenge to the UN system and the international community as a whole to find ways to support countries make this transition.
Thank you very much. And I will maybe come back to other panelists with that question later. I think it's a key one about squeeze and seize, but it's also a key one in terms of international community's response. So maybe be prepared for revisiting that one as an option. I realize it's a very tough question. Okay, finally, before we move to question time, I'd really like to kind of situate this discussion in the kind of here and now. What's the kind of the real crux of this climate trade nexus, particularly the experience of carbon markets and the need to think about just transition, as we were just touching on. So let me turn to Mr. Diop. Thank you so much for being with us, and you are a national focal point for technology transfer. And so really keen to get your kind of insights really on what support is needed, kind of nitty-gritty help to really be able to take that opportunity and seize that in your country.
Thank you, moderator, Mr. Chair. First of all, I would like to apologize for the absence for Mrs. Sarr, our chair of the LDC group. She's in another meeting. That's the reason why she couldn't be here with us. And we are very happy to be here today with you. And we appreciate your invitation. Now, coming to your question. I mean, there is a lot of points that was already raised here. I think I don't need to come back about all these points. Finance, for example, you told about the PENA and the NAPS, and we are very happy to hear that your advocacy to help us implement this, because it's a real problem what we have. We have a lot of documents, and I will come back to this on the field of technology transfer, for example. At the moment, we are all elaborating our technology need access in the LDC countries. And most of them, they don't have the help necessary to do it. I think at the moment, only a third country from all LDC countries, 46, they already have their taps ready. And we need to be helped, because if we talk about technology transfer, first of all, we have to decline what kind of technology we need before we can say, okay, this technology, this kind of energy, for example, renewable energy, or technology for adaptation, or things like that. First of all, we have to put on the table what are our needs. And to do this, we need money. Okay, I don't want to talk about money, but it's a problem. I am in this group. We are at the moment discussing, and it is a very hard job what we are doing. So we can get the money what can that help us bring on the table our technology need assessment. And only if you have this assessment already, we can make an implementation. And that's another problem. And so that's the reason why we say, okay, the technology mechanism of the UNFCCC has to be changed. It means the mandate of them, normally they help us only in capacity building. They help us to develop a policy, But if we want to implement all this technology transfer, what we already have on the table, no one is ready to do it. And if you want to go to the GCF, for example, it's very hard for us to do it. That's the reason why I say, okay, we need really a technology transfer. We need to maybe change the mandate of the CTCN, because the CTCN and the tech, they are the technology arm of the UNFC Triple C. And that's the reason why we say, okay, we need a help in this field. And that can help us to green, I would say, our trade. They can help us to green our production line in the agriculture field, for example, by setting in place or putting in place solar pumps, for example. That's small things what we need, really. Sometimes you don't need really a very big things to develop or to help or to green our trade line. And the other point is really you talk about this carbon market. It's true, think Glasgow, we have the framework already on the table. But if you see in all these LDC countries, I would say not more than 10 countries have already a carbon market framework. Because this Article 6.2, 6.4, they are very complicated. And for us, we need a framework before handling with carbon market. And that's the reason why we say, okay, in this field too, we need technology transfer. We need an help. Then without this help, we cannot have a benefit from this carbon what we reduce. That's the reason why we say this carbon certificates. That's the reason why we say, for example, it is a very important point for us that we first put in place a framework that can help us to contabilize all carbon certificate what we have, all carbon reduction what we are doing in our country, and of course, it is maybe better to have a management information system that can help us to manage all these things. And I think if you can reach this, to have a framework, the technology what we need is transferred. I think it will be easier for us to develop and to green this trade. And there is another point, because sometimes I think we are all talking about trade from the south to the north. But it's maybe time to think about the trade between South countries. And it's better to help us within the African Union, for example, or the Asian Union, how to improve all these mechanisms that can help us improve all these markets, so we can really set up a very interesting market for us. It can be interesting for us, for our producer. But the problem what we have at the moment is we only want to do all things behind the European standards. And it's a failure in my point of view. And I think it can be helpful for us if we can be helped within all this continent to develop the trade between the countries, so it can be a first step. And I think it can help us to green the production line and then go to the international market. Okay. I would say, okay, good. I wanted to be a little bit brief, and maybe if there is some question direct to technology transfer, for example, I can answer it later.
Thank you very much. No, really good. So somebody said to me the other day at a panel on ESG, somebody in corporate finance, they said, look, can we just reflect a moment that all of the new standards we're putting in place, all of the new expectations in supply chains and so on, isn't this just new colonialism? And, you know, I was just picking up your point about the extent to which that drives through and impacts LDCs. So we're going to turn for questions, but I suppose just my way of summarizing this is that we heard from the minister from the Gambia that there is no other option here. Greening exports and thinking about green trade is the only option. But then I also heard, for that to be possible, we need finance, the right type of finance. We need technology transfer that works for everybody. We need the right infrastructure and frameworks that are out there for carbon market support. We need green jobs. We need early stage, you know, younger people being skilled in such a way that they can be and seize the opportunity. And that really that all needs to come together, and it all needs to come together within an international support framework that can make a difference to LDCs. That seems like a big ask right now, but I'd be really curious as to what the audience's view is. What questions do you have of panelists? What's your view on this topic? If we can keep questions and interventions really short and you can tell us who you are, that would be fabulous. And then we'll get comments from members of the panel before we close. So we've got about 10 minutes. Would anybody like to kick us off with a question or a reflection? Somebody here in the front. Is there a microphone we can get across at all? Thank you very much.
Yes, I am happy to break the ice. I'm Daniel Ramos. I work at the Trade and Environment Division of the WTO. And I found so interesting what you said on Mr. Diop on the difficulty for LDCs to identify their technology needs. Because there is a mechanism, and at the WTO we also have an obligation for developed economies to help transfer technology to LDCs. But if what I hear is true, that it's very hard to even identify what the needs are, we have a real problem. So maybe you could expand a little bit on your views on, would it be for the UNFCCC technology mechanism to help further on that, maybe other agencies, what they could do to help identify those needs?
I mean, the problem what we have during this negotiation session, in the past, we had a program called Poznan program that helped us to develop all our technology needs. And this program is coming at the end, I think last year, I think. And at the moment, we say, we from LDCs and also G77 countries, we need money to develop a new program. But they say no. What we first have to do is to evaluate what happened during these 5 years. But I mean, this process, for example, we decided in June in Bonn to make a workshop next year to how we can evaluate the job done with this Poznan program. It means during this time, from now to this time, no one from us can make a TNA. And what is the result of this evaluation? We don't know. And we hope the Jeff can supply us with money so we can continue this program, but it is not sure. It is not. And the problem what we have, I think, we need a lot of organization. For example, the mandate of the Green Climate Fund has to be extended so they can finance things like this. It cannot be true that they're sitting here and waiting till we say, okay, that's the need, that's what we want to do, and they can, at this moment, start to do something. For example, in my country, in Senegal, if you say, no, at the moment, we want to deploy renewable energy, they ask, oh, well, renewable energy, we did it already. But for example, we want to deploy green energy, hydrogen. And they say, no, please tell us what you really need, how you want to do it, and if you are really able to do it. I mean, it can take a long. And if you don't have someone who can finance us this process, it means we have no chance to do it. And I think so that's the reason why we say all these finance mechanisms, GEF, GCF, Green Climate Fund, they have to be there and help us develop all these programs so we can really see what is our need. Because, that's, there is at the moment, everybody is talking about mitigation. But the problem what we are a coast country. And we have a lot of problems with adaptation. For us, the adaptation issue is more important than mitigation. But it is not, you cannot gain money with adaptation. And that's the reason it is not interesting for the private sector. It means we need grants to do it. But from where can we get the money? And that's the reason why we say, okay, organizations like GEF, GCF, World Bank, why not? They all have to change their mind and say, okay, it is now time to help us define all this TNA so we can have it. Because without this TNA, it is not possible for us to make a technology transfer. It's really a barrier.
Thank you. Let's take a quick additional couple of questions. Maybe we'll take them as a block. There's a lady just behind you there. And then,
Thank you very much, and thank you so much for this panel today. So my name is Carolyn de Burbeck. I work at the Forum on Trade, Environment, and the SDGs. And it's great to hear this focus today on how we can foster really more inclusive cooperation on trade and sustainability. In the remarks so far, I've heard that you're saying we need trade cooperation that can help build resilience, can help countries adapt to the trade impacts of the climate crisis, and also to compete in a green global economy. But what would be interesting to hear about is more about this international sort of support framework and enabling environment. And I note that both the minister from Gambia and also from Finland are members of the Coalition of Trade Ministers on Climate. It would be interesting to hear from you, what are the kind of concrete things that have worked or partnerships that have worked bilaterally, regionally, or South-South that you think we can build on concretely to make some progress on some of these priorities you've set out?
thank you very much. Do you want a question as well? And then we'll conclude with the panel.
Good. Thank you. Hans-Peter Lankes from ODI. And I have a question with respect to the EU carbon border adjustment mechanism and perhaps others of that sort. One is, to what extent is this a concern for LDCs? Second, are you getting support to meet the conditions, especially on tracing and measurement? And third, do you see it as an opportunity? Are you engaging with the CBAM, with the Europeans and others, as a source of finance for the various things that you have very rightly highlighted?
Thank you. That's a set of tough questions. What I'm going to do, given the interest of time, is I'm going to go down the panel, and I'm going to ask you to put on your very best kind of news soundbite hats. Like, what do you want us, from the questions that we've had and from what you've heard of the panel, what do you want us to take away from this panel as the actions that we do when we get back to our desks after COP? But equally, please pick up any of the questions that really resonate with you. But Minister, let's start with you.
Well, it's about giving an incentives for companies to do joint ventures in Africa or maybe even just go there by themselves and employ the people locally, and also they transfer the technology doing that as well. So I had pretty good experiences on the Finnish side of this. For example, setting up a saw in the forest industry where Finnish forest industry was involved. And I think it can be done in any area, and considering that all the Finnish companies are already like climate friendly and high on clean tech, so I think it should be looked on maybe on their preferences as well, because then it would be more it would work more on the free market also after they got the incentive.
Thank you very much. Deputy Director General, would you like to respond?
Yeah, thank you. It's striking from the panel and the question how trade is always a key component of all the dimensions which have been mentioned. If I take the short-term dimension and adaptation, especially in the context of agriculture, we have immediately a trade issue. For instance, for food importing countries, the question of export restriction on food is key, is vital. And we have been starting to dealing with that in the WTO. But even on the more structural question that you have been raising on my right, especially on access to technology, access to finance, trade is part of the answer. And what is always impressive to us is that access to finance is many times sought only in terms of public finance investment. But if you have a market, you leverage private finance. And this is what trade is about. And so duty-free, quota-free type of measures are the things which are also going to incentivize private finance to invest. Now, talking about trade, there is also an inward-looking dimension that I think LDCs need to keep in mind. It's important to review each country's own policy. For instance, sometimes we have legacy tariffs, which can be very high on the technologies, the very technologies that we want to buy and import. Let's reconsider that. I'm not saying it has to be, sometimes it will have very good justification. Sometimes it's just history. So why don't review that? Same thing for the point that you made about South-South. There are a lot of potential value chains, especially in Africa in the context of the Continental Free Trade Agreement. A lot of value chains which could be built with a little revision of intra-Africa trade policy. And this is something where the focus has to be. It is already being undertaken, so I'm a little bit pushing an open door, but it has to be accelerated. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much. And Minister Gambia, would you like to give your reflection?
Okay. To the partners that we have been working with, I want to say the LDC, including the Gambia, we're working with all the partners, and all is working and all are not working. Yes, because as mentioned by my brother from Senegal, the bureaucracy needs to change. The prerequisite needs to change. We need to understand that we are in a global call for action. And this action needs to be in line with our individual capabilities, potentials, and prospects. So each country, each group, they have their individual potentials. Like the Gambia, when we are doing the study on the West Africa power pool, the Gambia was found to be one of the best countries that has the most quality sun signs for the solar. So these are our potentials, and among it others. So, but again, what I'm talking on to add on to the technology transfer, is very important that we reduce the bureaucracy. In as much as you want to support, it has to be very efficient and easily explained and understandable. I agree that the policies has to be enticing. When it's come to investment, I just said it this morning, business people, they need profit. We don't have to joke about that. Either you give them profit or the best that they can go in for break even, but no losses. But again, we have other contingency challenges like the political environment, which we have seen recently. It started becoming unstable. And those are key risks. But we have in sectors, maybe the WTO and others can come in to provide the risk platform. They need to de-risk the investment for this private sector to play. Because Africa don't have the capacity to de-risk the entire risk around it. Because it is an all-inclusive, like COVID. We never thought that COVID was going to come and it was going to hit us this hard. So if you want a small country like the Gambia to provide that risk portfolio, we cannot. So this is where we have to come in. But then I know there are prospects in the Gambia or in the African countries. Let's do a SWOT analysis and we go by this. We have the Paris Agreement as an instrument to use. We have other agreements and conventions to use as a platform so that we go. But then our individual policies also, they're very important. Like the Gambia now, we're working on to make sure that we review all our policies to make it in line with the international stake. Because when you're working in isolation, if you want anybody to come and work with you, they have to see themselves in your policy. And they have to trust the policy. Like the carbon framework. I think Gambia is already, we should be having our national carbon framework by end of December. We're already working on that. Because we understand that you cannot come and work with X on a different agreement, Y come on a different agreement, the same country. It's not going to work. Either we are disadvantaged or we are cheating somebody. So well, in most of the cases, we are at disadvantage. We cannot cheat them. When they come for their contracts, they make sure that they are on top of it. But let's have a national framework so that we can use the same model to work with whoever we are going to deal with.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you very much. And you're getting a round of applause for the comments. Thank you. And I really am going to have to ask the last two panelists for your news soundbite, please. You're going to go first? Okay.
Yeah. So the Doha Programme of Action and its predecessor, the Istanbul Programme of Action, have aimed at 7% rates of GNI growth, per capita GNI, in order to help LDCs achieve the SDGs, achieve the socio-economic, the health objectives, the education ones. We have seen in projections analysis that there's broadly a one-to-one correspondence between GDP growth and GHG growth. So clearly the challenge is to decouple. How can we do that? Well, my soundbite is a full court press to leverage the potential of renewables in LDCs. I mentioned some of the ways in which we could do it in my presentation. I think we need the World Bank involved, we need the IFIs involved, we need the technology mechanism of the UNFCCC, we need the CTCN. We need to make sure that we turn this into a reality, but it also requires private sector solutions, overcoming perceived high risk in LDCs, finding ways of de-risking. It was mentioned by the Honourable Minister. That's my soundbite. Thank you.
Very clear. Excellent. Thank you. Mr. Diop, closing words before we turn to our organisers.
I would say most of the things have already been said. Only maybe focus on the private sector in the LDC countries, because policy is already in place, but they are really too small. That's the reason why they cannot play as with all global players. And I think here we have to maybe synthesize all these initiatives. We have a lot of initiatives today, and that's our problem. Really, you talk about this initiative from the EU, and there is a lot of country initiative, German, the USA, or things like that. And we lose ourselves in all these initiatives. And maybe it's better if you can synthesize it. And so with WTO or FCC, they can help make a synthesize so we can really see and know which agency can help us before losing our capacities, our money, or things like that. And it can be very helpful for us if really all these things is optimized so they can be very efficient. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then I'm going to just give our two organisers, Hans-Peter from ODI and Simon, do you want to just say one word of conclusion by way of thanks?
Well, Tom, yeah, I'd like to thank you and the Excellencies, our distinguished panelists, as well as co-organizer ODI and WTO. It's been a fantastic event, and really thank you all for making the time and sharing your wealth of knowledge. I'll hand over to Hans-Peter.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Tom. Just very briefly, I think this was a really inspirational event. There's a lot that we can take from this. At ODI, we have a program looking at the opportunities, the seas, but also at the threats from changes in trade policies and from changes in trade patterns, the green squeeze. And we will be very happy to continue working with you on these issues going forward with our partners from the WTO. All right.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, everybody, and apologies that we've overran, but I really hope you have a fabulous rest of your COP28. Thank you, everybody. Thank you online as well.